This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, good morning. Am I audible? Good morning, students. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, so good morning, all. Is the screen ever visible to you? Is it shared?
No, sir.
Is this? Wait. Now is it visible to you?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay. So today the topic we'll be going to discuss is temporal bone fracture. Facial nerve is covered for you or not? Facial nerve. Has the topic facial nerve been covered or not? Anybody? Please respond.
No, sir.
Facial nerve is not covered. Okay then. So any bone, if it's get injured, then any trauma or something, then it's likely to get fractured, right? So we have a bone in ear which is known as temporal bone, and it can easily get fractured with a very high impact collision. Okay, if there is some high impact, then that can also get fractured. And as you know, the temporal bone is very complex. It's a very complex and lot of important structures are present. So we need to know about what happens when there's a fracture to the bone. So this is an axial section of the bone. Means we are showing, and now I'm showing you a picture of an axial section of the bone, the skull. So this is the whole. This is the whole temporal bone. Okay. So this structure, the outermost is the squamous part. The whole structure, this one is the petrous part, and this is the tympanic part. Okay, so we have around 4 parts in the temporal bone: the squamous, the mastoid, the tympanic part, the petrous part. So we are more concerned about the petrous part because in the petrous we have the facial nerve, and we also have the semicircular canals and all. So we are more concerned about the mastoid and the petrous part. According to the collision, or according to the impact, there are two types of fractures observed in the temporal bone. Okay, so this is the type A1, means this is the A, which is a longitudinal fracture when we have an impact as from the parietal side. We have a parietal bone, occipital bone, frontal bone in the skull, right? So when the impact is on the parietal bone, parietal or temporal skull, so this type of fracture occurs in the temporal bone. So this is also known as longitudinal. Okay, this is also known as longitudinal fracture. Parietal or temporal bone causes, the fracture line starts almost at the outside. Means from this, it may start from the tympanic part. See, this is the tympanic part, right? So this may start from here, and it will proceed up till the almost foramen of lacerum, foramen lacerum. This is the foramen lacerum. So it may traverse through the tympanic membrane, the exonotic canal, tympanic membrane, and it will reach the inner ear. Okay, but we are not most likely to injure the labyrinth or something, because you can see the labyrinth is a bit inferior to that. So in this type of fractures, we may not injure the labyrinth, but the chances of injuring to the facial nerve is more in the longitudinal type of fractures. So other type of fracture is when we have an occipital impact. So the fracture line may start from here. This is the foramen magnum. Okay, see, this is the foramen magnum. So when you have an impact in the occipital side, it means that is from the posterior to the anterior. You can imagine your head. Okay, so if you have a side to side collision, then you will have a longitudinal fracture. If you have an anterior to posterior collision or impact is from posterior to superior anterior, then you will have an occipital blow. So that will cause a transverse fracture, and it might start from your foramen magnum, and it might reach it will reach the petrous part of the bone, temporal bone, might be traversing this otic otic capsule or the labyrinth. So now we'll discuss some differences between the longitudinal and the occipital on the transverse fractures. Give me a second. Okay, so we'll continue. So there are two types of fractures, right? So according to the frequency, the most common type of fracture observed in the temporal bone is longitudinal type. Around 80% of the fractures in the temporal bone are longitudinal type of fractures. That is when we have a parietal type of blow. Okay, and only 20% of the fractures will have a transverse type of fracture. Then according to the type of injury, it's as we have discussed, parietal blow and occipital blow. So parietal is generally a longitudinal type of fracture, and occipital is a transverse one. And how the fracture line runs. So as you have seen in the picture previously, the longitudinal, it runs parallel to the long axis of the petrous pyramid. See, so this is the petrous pyramid. So this line travels parallel to this axis. Okay, so this is a petrous pyramid, and a line going across parallel to it will be a longitudinal type of fracture. So and it starts at the squamous part of the temporal bone and it ends at the foramen lacerum. Already, as I've told, so this is the squamous type of the temporal bone, right, when towards the lateral side. So it will start from here and it will reach the foramen lacerum. So it runs parallel to the petrous pyramid, and it starts at the squamous part of the temporal bone, and it reaches the foramen lacerum. So this was the longitudinal type of fracture, which is due to the parietal blow or the parieto-temporal blow, and it's most common, 80%. And the other one is the transverse fracture, which starts at the foramen magnum and it's perpendicular to this petrous pyramid, and it reaches the almost towards the foramen spinosum. So it starts at foramen magnum or jugular foramen, where we have cranial nerve 9, 10, 11. So it starts from there and it runs across the petrous and it runs towards the foramen spinosum. Okay. So what happens? Bleeding from the ear. It is generally seen in the longitudinal type of fracture because there is injury to the tegmen and the tympanic membrane. So when there is a breach in the tympanic membrane, or when it's a breach at the tegmen area, the tegmen is the part which covers the brain. So the bony differentiation between the brain and the temporal bone, that is known as tegmen. Okay, so the roof of the temporal bone is the tegmen. So when there is injury to that, and it's most commonly seen in the longitudinal type of fracture, and the tympanic membrane is ruptured, so more bleeding from the ear is generally seen. Whereas in the transverse type of fracture, it is generally absent. If it's intact, so the blood might be collected in the behind the tympanic membrane, and hemotympanic may be seen. So when there is an injury to the tympanic membrane, that is seen in the longitudinal type of fracture, bleeding is seen. Whereas in the transverse type of fracture, it's not, the tympanic membrane is intact, so the hemotympanic may be seen. So what happens when there is cerebrospinal CSF leak? CSF leak is generally seen in the longitudinal type of fracture because as the tympanic membrane is ruptured, with discharge, blood can also come. So otorrhea is present in the longitudinal type of fracture and it is often mixed with blood, whereas transverse, it is absent or unmanifested generally. As the tegmen gets injured in the longitudinal type of fracture, otorrhea is present and also CSF leak can be seen. Okay. So structures injured. So this we need to understand. Structures injured. So longitudinal, the tegmen gets injured, the ossicles, because it runs parallel to the petrous pyramid, right? So ossicles are more likely to get injured, and the tympanic membrane. Whereas transverse, it is across the petrous pyramid, so labyrinth or the cranial nerve 8. So these are generally getting injured in the transverse type of fracture. As the ossicles are damaged, so mostly the conductive type of hearing loss will be seen in the longitudinal type of fracture. But whereas as the inner ear is getting injured in the transverse type of fracture, so the person will have a sensory neural type of hearing loss. So it's simple. When the ossicles are getting damaged in the longitudinal type, the conductive hearing loss will be there. Whereas in the transverse type, the otic capsule or the inner ear is getting injured, so sensory neural type of hearing loss is seen. Vertigo. So vertigo is generally less because the inner ear is mostly intact in the longitudinal type. So vertigo is more common in transverse type. So it is severe in the transverse type of fracture, and it is generally due to the injury to labyrinth or the cranial nerve 8. Whereas longitudinal type of fracture, it's very less often, but they can present with vertigo as due to concussion. Generally, when there's a side-to-side impact or the head injury, when you have a collision or an impact, so generally there will be a concussion. So that might eventually give the patient a vertigo feeling, but it's generally not seen in the longitudinal type of fracture. So all these differences are to be known, because to classify whether this type of means, when the patient comes to you and you try to investigate, so when you see that there is a conductive hearing loss and there is a little vertigo, and if you see the otorrhea is present, and sometimes the CSF leak is present, then you can suspect the patient to have a longitudinal type of fracture. Whereas when they have only vertigo as a complaint, then you might think that okay, it might be a transverse fracture also. Coming to the facial paralysis. Facial paralysis is generally seen more in the transverse type of fracture, when the fracture line runs across the petrous pyramid. Okay, and longitudinal also there is a chances, but it has less chances at only 20% of the 20% of the cases only. When when we have a longitudinal type of fracture, facial paralysis seen. It is generally delayed onset type of facial paralysis in longitudinal type of fractures. Nerve is injured in the tympanic segment. We have around 4 segments. Okay, it's labyrinthine segment, tympanic segment, mastoid segment, and the last segment, which is when it crosses the stylomastoid foramen. So the most likely part of the facial nerve which may get injured with the longitudinal type of fracture is tympanic segment, that is distal to geniculate ganglion. We have 2 genus. Okay, first genu and the second genu. So when distal means after the first genu, the tympanic segment starts. So between the first and the second genu, we might have a fracture line passing through the facial nerve, and most likely the nerve may get injured there, and we'll have a facial paralysis, but generally it's seen less. Whereas in the transverse type, it is most common, 50%, and it's very immediate in onset. Injury is the nerve is in the middle of the labyrinthine segment. That is the first segment of the facial nerve. So the first segment of the intratemporal part of the facial nerve, that is labyrinthine segment, might get injured in the transverse type of fracture, and that is proximal to the geniculate ganglion. So the fracture line is passing proximal to the geniculate ganglion, then it is transverse type of fracture. If it is in the distal to the geniculate ganglion, it's a longitudinal type. So all these differences are to be mentioned. If you know all these differences, then you can have a differential diagnosis. You can come to a provisional diagnosis. So what happens when there is a paralysis? Paralysis is due to the intraneural hematoma, compression by a bony spicule or transection of the nerve. So the nerve might get compressed due to hematoma, or it can also be compressed due to a bony as during a fracture, the small pieces of bone can get separated, and that spicule may in turn damage the nerve. So, and sometimes, as you know, there are 3 types of nerve injuries. That is neuropraxia, neuronortmesis, and axonortmesis. If it's a neuropraxia, then this it may generally get healed by its own, and the recovery rate is more. So, and transaction of nerve means mostly a neuronortmesis. So these can also happen. So in these cases, it is important to know whether paralysis was of immediate or delayed onset. So immediate was seen in the transverse type of fractures, delayed was seen in the type of longitudinal type of fractures. So delayed onset paralysis is treated conservatively like Bell's palsy, while immediate onset paralysis may require surgery in the form of decompression or reanastomosis of cut ends or cable nerve grafting. So all these are type of the surgeries to be done when we have an immediate type of paralysis, that is generally seen in the transverse type of fracture. So this is a axial section of the temporal bone, see, and this is the line. You can see it's a this is the petrous part of the temporal bone, right? And it is a parallel to that. So this is a which type of fracture? It's a longitudinal type of fracture, and it is you can see this fracture line is going like this. So the otic, the labyrinth is almost normal, but you can see this is the tympanic membrane. Sorry, yeah, this is the tympanic membrane. Generally, the location of the tympanic membrane. So the tympanic membrane get ruptured, and these are the ossicles. The ossicles may get ruptured. So this is the longitudinal type of fracture seen in the CT section. And if it's a temporal part, then the fracture line would be like this. It will go like this. Okay, so if it goes like this, then it's a transverse type. If it is coming from the squamous towards the ossicles and towards the foramen lacerum, then it is a longitudinal type of fracture. And this is the intra-op picture. You can see there's a fracture. It's a transverse fracture generally. This is the tympanic membrane. Okay, this is the tympanic membrane area, and this is the squamous part. This is all the squamous part. And this is the petrous pyramid. This is the location of the petrous pyramid. So this is a transverse fracture scene, line scene. You are able to see. So this was all about the temporal bone fractures. I'll just once rush through once. In this picture only, I'll just once rush through. Just remember, it's a small topic. You need not remember much in this. There are 2 types of fractures. One is longitudinal and one is transverse. Longitudinal starts at, this is the most common type of fracture, 80% seen, and it is due to parietal blow, and it starts from squamous part and it runs towards parallel to the petrous pyramid, and it reaches the foramen lacerum. The bleeding from the ear is seen generally because there is rupture of the tympanic membrane, and hearing loss is seen, and generally only 20% of the facial paralysis is seen, and that is most likely injuring the tympanic segment of the facial nerve. So this was the longitudinal one, and this is the transverse fracture, which is generally transverse fracture, which is only 20% seen in 20% of the cases. It runs across the petrous pyramid. It starts at the foramen lacerum, sorry, foramen magnum, and it goes towards the foramen spinosum, and it is due to the occipital blow. This in this, the bleeding is generally not seen, and the structures injured is mostly the labyrinth or the cranial nerve weight. So the patient will have a sensory type of hearing loss, and the facial paralysis is generally seen in more cases because more chances of injury towards the labyrinthine segment is seen in this part. Okay, so this was the temporal bone paralysis, temporal bone fracture causing the facial paralysis. And if the facial paralysis is immediate is generally seen in the transverse type of fractures. Then you have to explore it because there might be a hematoma or there might be a nerve compression. So you need to decompress the bone, decompress it, the nerve. So you'll do definitely do a surgery. You open the mastoid and you see where the this fracture line is going. And if it's a delayed onset like in the Bell's palsy, you can wait for you can go for a conservative treatment. Okay, so this was the temporal bone fractures. Okay, so we'll take a 5 minutes break and I'll start another topic, that is direct laryngoscopy. If you can come on, and if you come yourself and you can talk to me. If you have any doubts, you can you can unmute your and talk. So anyone has any doubts in the temporal bone fracture? Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so did does anybody have any doubt in the temporal bone fracture? If not, then we'll continue our class with direct laryngoscopy. Now we'll take up one surgery one day, so that as most of the topics are covered, Today I'll start with direct laryngoscopy. Then the next class I'll go with esophagoscopy and bronchoscopy. I'll show you some videos. Okay, then we'll start with the topic direct laryngoscopy. So direct laryngoscopy means actually there are two types of laryngoscopy we do. In the OP procedure, what we do is indirect laryngoscopy also. Whenever the patient comes with the complaints of, we will start a brief introduction about the laryngoscopy. When some patients come to you with the complaints of dysphagia, with complaints of hoarseness of voice, or with complaints of breathlessness, and you suspect some change in voice, and you suspect some or then the hypopharynx something, then what you do is you try to you have to visualize the larynx. How do you do it in the setup of in the OPD setup? What we can do is we have an ideal mirror. We have an ideal mirror which is light used with the help of a light with the bullseye lamp. We project the light towards on the mirror, and we'll ask the patient to sit in front of us, and we'll hold the tongue and we'll pull the tongue outside. Once we pull the tongue outside, what we do is we introduce the larynx in an ideal mirror, and we'll observe the structures. So the structures observed in the indirect, there's a question, you can get a 2 marks question like indirect laryngoscopy. Then what do you need to write? It is an OPD procedure done to visualize the larynx, and the structures seen in the ideal are: first you will be seeing the base of the tongue. Okay, so first you will see the base of the tongue, then you will see the vallecula, then the epiglottis, then the arytenoids, aryepiglottic folds, false chords, true chords, and at last you will be seeing the anterior commissure. So these are the structures seen. So you need to write it as the sequence. So note it down. So the sequence is: first you will be seeing the base of the tongue, because with normal oral examination you would be seeing the tongue, you would be seeing the anterior pillar, the posterior pillar, the tonsillar fossa, the posterior almost the anterior two-third of the tongue you will be visualizing. The uvula you can see, the posterior pharyngeal wall. So if you need to see beyond that, then what you do is you do ideal, and the first structure which you see is the base of the tongue. Sometimes lingual tonsils get hypertrophied, so that will also cause some change in voice or some different dysphagia. So the first thing observed is base of tongue. Then the vallecula. Vallecula is is a hollow space between the epiglottis and the base of the tongue. So the vallecula. Then sometime a valvular cyst can be there, or valvular some foreign bodies might get lodged in the vallecula. So you can also observe it in the ideal mirror. So coming so the next structure you see is the epiglottis. Epiglottis will have a laryngeal surface and a valvular surface. It will have two surfaces. So epiglottis, and from the epiglottis you will be you'll be having a epiglottic fold. Two folds there will be two folds which will start from the laryngeal surface of the epiglottis, and it will join the arytenoids. So that's why it is known as epiglottic folds. Then you have two arytenoids. Then beyond that you will be seeing the false chords, then the true chords, and at last the anterior commissure. So these are the structures you will be seeing in the ideal. So but sometimes what happens is in small children, or when you want to, and when the patient is not cooperative, you have tried doing an ideal but you're not able to visualize the larynx, then the next option would be your direct laryngoscopy. So then we'll go for a direct laryngoscopy. So whenever there's a procedure we do with an endoscope, it will so we have for every procedure you'll have indications and the contraindications. And coming to the indications, when you do a scopy like diagnostic nasal endoscopy or esophagoscopy or a laryngoscopy or a bronchoscopy or a colonoscopy, proctoscopy, whatever you do, what happens is you have to you have two types of indications. One is a diagnostic type of indication, the other is therapeutic type of indication. Okay, so for any scopies, you have to write indications in two, you have to classify them, whether it is diagnostic or a therapeutic. So to visualize the larynx, we do a diagnostic type of laryngoscopy. So when the indirect laryngoscopy is not possible as in infants and young children, and the symptomatology points to larynx or hypopharynx, that is where the patient comes to you with hoarseness or dyspnea or a stridor and dysphagia, and you're not able to do ideal, then it is a direct laryngoscopy is done in those cases. So that is one of the indication. Indirect laryngoscopy has not been successful. That is due to an excessive gag reflex or overhanging epiglottis obscuring a part of the complete view or complete view of the larynx. Then that is also an indication of direct laryngoscopy. Sometimes what happens is even the patient is cooperative and you're doing it, but you're not able to see some hidden areas. That is in the hypopharynx side, that is base of tongue. Tongue might be very bulky and you're not able to see. So the base of the tongue, vallecula, and lower part of the pyriform fossa. So these are some of the structures which are not able to see in see by doing a direct laryngoscopy ideal. So you can do a diagnostic laryngoscopy. Structures like larynx, when infrahyoid epiglottis, anterior commissure, ventricles, subglottic region. So these are some structures which are not able to see in ideal. So you'll do a diagnostic laryngoscopy. And sometimes to diagnose, to find the extent of growth and take a biopsy, we also do a diagnostic level. So these are the indications. One is when you're not able to do ideal, when you're not doing, not able to do ideal because of some other like some factors like overhanging epiglottis or excessive gag reflex, to see the hidden areas of the larynx or the hypopharynx, and to see the extent of the growth, we do a direct laryngoscopy. Then coming to the therapeutic part, when you have diagnosed it, then you also use this type of procedure to remove for some therapeutic part, that is to remove the benign lesion of larynx, that is papilloma or fibroma or vocal conduit or polyp or a cyst, or also removal of foreign bodies from larynx and the hypopharynx, dilatation of laryngeal strictures. Sometimes you might have a benign stricture or something, then you need to dilate the laryngeal structures, right? Strictures. So, and removal of the foreign bodies, removal of some take a biopsy or removal of the benign lesions of larynx. So all these you also do a like a direct laryngoscopy. So indications will be classified as diagnostic and therapeutic. Diagnostic is only to visualize the larynx and sometimes take a biopsy, but therapeutic is you're treating it, you're removing some part, or you're doing a dilatation. Excuse me. Okay, coming to the contraindications. When you should not do, see any procedure, you need to classify it as whether in what conditions you have to do and in what conditions you should not do. So the contraindications of doing a direct laryngoscopy are when you have a disease of or injuries to the spine, cervical spine. When the patient has some C-spine injuries, then you shouldn't do, because during to do this procedure you have to flex the neck, and while doing that, if the patient is already having some disease or some Down syndrome or something like that, or injuries are there, then you might aggravate that condition. So it's better not to do a direct laryngoscopy. You can go for a fiber optic laryngoscopy, which is generally flexible type of laryngoscopy. Direct laryngoscopy is generally rigid, or means it's a type of laryngoscopy. When the patient has moderate or the marked respiratory obstruction, unless the airway has been provided by tracheostomy, if when the patient has respiratory obstruction, it's better not to do a direct laryngoscopy, because that might aggravate that condition, and the patient might go into hypoxia, and it will be a problem for him. So when the patient has a respiratory obstruction, it's better not to do. And if the patient has a recent coronary occlusion or cardiac decomposition, some surgeries have been done. So generally, they're not preferable to go for a direct laryngoscopy procedures like this. So these are some of the contraindications when there is disease or injuries to the cervical spine, when there is respiratory obstruction or some cardiac ailments previously. Anesthesia. Generally, when we go for a direct laryngoscopy in children or some elderly people, and we are doing a rigid type of laryngoscopy, it's better to do. It's better to take general anesthesia is preferred rather than doing it in local anesthesia. And in infants and young procedure, no anesthesia may be required if procedure is for diagnostic purpose. If they generally, this sentence means when in infants and young, if only diagnostic type is there, then generally we go for a fiber optic laryngoscopy. We'll just pass it through the nose and we'll observe it and come out. So we won't do anything else. So generally, GI is not preferred in those type of cases. So this is the position which I was talking to you. The patient will lie in the supine position. Okay, so the patient will lie in the supine position, and you will raise the head by keeping a pillow or something under the head, that you will raise it by at least 10 to 15 centimeters, and then the neck is flexed on thorax. So the neck is flexed here and extended on the atlanto-occipital joint. So you have to flexion of the thorax and extension at the atlanto-occipital joint. So that will bring your larynx up, and it will be in a straight line so that you can easily pass through your laryngoscope like this, and you can visualize this part of the larynx. Okay. So this is the epiglottis. Okay. So this is the epiglottis, and here would be somewhere you would be seeing your larynx. This is the esophagus, and this is the larynx. It's also known as barking dog position. Okay, barking dog position is also synonym for it, for this position. Now, how the procedure is done briefly. First, a piece of gauze is placed on the upper teeth. So when you would be applying some pressure on the upper teeth. So you need to first check up whether the teeth are fragile or not. If they are fragile, then you have to take consent. While doing the procedure, the teeth might get dislodged. So you need to tell the patient priorly. If at all they are loose. If they are tight enough, then you can tell them you can place a piece of gauze over the upper teeth to protect them against trauma. The laryngoscope is lubricated with a little autoclaved liquid, paraffin or jelly. Means at the end of the at the distal end of the laryngoscope, you will be applying some lubricative jelly, so that will help you to pass the laryngoscope easily. So firstly, the piece of gauze is placed over the upper teeth, and then jelly is applied. Then the laryngoscope is held by the handle in the left hand. Means you will be holding it in your non-dominant hand. Okay, you will be holding it by a non-dominant hand, because your right hand will be means if your dominant hand will be used with a section or with some biopsy, if you wanted to take a biopsy or all. So you will be holding it with your left hand, and right hand is used to retract the lips and guide the laryngoscope and to handle such an instrument. So the laryngoscope is held by the handle in the left hand, and you will and the right hand will be used to retract the lips and guide the laryngoscope. It means the right hand will be showing the path, and left hand will be passing the laryngoscope. Okay. So laryngoscope is introduced by one side of the tongue, which is pushed to the opposite side till posterior to the third of the tongue, and is reached. Means first you will be passing the laryngoscope on the tongue till you reach the posterior third of the tongue, and it is means initially as you're doing it from your left hand side, you will be passing like this, and once you reach the posterior of the tongue, you will come into the midline, and at that time you will be visualizing the epiglottis. So that will bring you into the picture epiglottis. And then the laryngoscope is now advanced behind the epiglottis and lifted forward without levering in the means. You should make sure that you are not applying pressure over the upper teeth or jaw. Only a little gentle pressure is applied when when you see an epiglottis like this. What you do is you pass the endoscope, the laryngoscope like this, and you push it like this, lift it upwards. So that's that is the place, means you will be observing the larynx. So this is something like epiglottis, and here the laryngoscope is coming like this. Okay, the laryngoscope will this is over the tongue, and when you reach the posterior half of the tongue, what it comes into is a visualization of the epiglottis. And once you pass your laryngoscope beneath it and then push it upwards, so that will show you, means by that time you will reach the larynx. If and we also have a anterior commissure laryngoscope also, means we have two types of laryngoscopes. One because during some in some people anterior commissure is not at all visualized. So to visualize the anterior commissure, we have a something other known as anterior commissure laryngoscope. Then its tip can be advanced further between the ventricular bands to examine the ventricles in anterior commissure. It can be passed between the vocal cords to examine the subglottic region. So you will be passing first. So the first structure which you see is the tongue. You will pass it from one side. You will reach the midline. That is the posterior part of the tongue. Then you will see an epiglottis. The epiglottis lifted with the laryngoscope. Then what you see is the whole larynx, means the arytenoids, aryepiglottic folds, the true cords, false cords, everything. And sometimes to visualize the anterior commissure and to see the ventricles and all, you will advance it and the laryngoscope beyond that, and sometimes you may also see the subglottic region also. The following structures are examined serially: base of the tongue. So these are the structure sequence: base of the tongue, left and the right vallicula, epiglottis, that is its tip, lingual surface and the laryngeal surfaces, right and left piriform sinuses, aryepiglottic folds, arytenoids, postcricoid region, both false cords, anterior and the posterior commissure, right and the left ventricles, right and the left vocal cords, and subglottic area. Mobility of the vocal cords should also be observed. This can be observed only when you do it in the local anesthesia. When you're doing it via fiber optic, or when the patient is capable enough, coping up enough, you can do it in a local anesthesia. Then you will ask the patient to phonate, so that will show the vocal cord movement also. So no point. Okay, this is important, because these are the these whenever the structures observed in direct laryngoscopy is asked, the question is asked, you need to answer like this. You will be seeing the base of tongue, right and left vallicula, epiglottis, piriform sinus both sides, aryepiglottic folds, arytenoids, then the postcricoid region, both the false cords, both the commissures, both the ventricles, and both the vocal cords. So what is the post-operative care you need to take? Patient is kept in coma position to prevent aspiration of the blood or secretions, and patient's respiration should be watched for any laryngeal spasm and cyanosis. Trauma to the larynx, especially if repeated attempts at laryngoscopy have been made, so you need to observe it. It may lead to laryngeal edema and respiratory distress, and bleeding may occur from the operative side. Patient may spit blood. Care should be taken to prevent aspiration. So generally when you do a procedure like this, the patient is kept for observation. So the patient is kept in coma position to prevent aspiration of blood or secretion. The patient is watched for laryngeal spasm or cyanosis. If you have done a repeated attempts, then trauma to the larynx is to be anticipated. And if the patient is under respiratory distress, then you have to understand that there is some laryngeal edema. So that's why we give a hydrocortisone or dexamethasone injection stat after the procedure to prevent the inflammation. And the bleeding is to be maintained, is to be observed. What are the complications? You may injure the lips and tongue if they are nipped between the teeth and the laryngoscope. Injury to the teeth, they may get dislodged and fall into the pharynx. So you need to be very careful. Bleeding can be seen in laryngeal edema. So these are some of the complications. So this, I hope you are able to see this video. Generally, give me a second. Hello, sir. నేను పంపిస్తాను. నేను క్లాస్లో ఉన్నాను సార్. ఇప్పుడు ఇది క్లాస్ చేస్తాను. హాఫ్ అన్ అవర్లో నేను మీకు పంపించేస్తాను. ఆల్రెడీ సార్ సార్ ఇప్పుడు మీకు కావాలి సార్ అసిస్టెంట్ ఎవరైనా? సరే సార్ సరే సార్ నేను నాకే నేను చేస్తాను. మొత్తం లిస్ట్ మొత్తం కావాలి సార్. So wait a minute. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
So this is the video showing how to do a direct laryngoscopy on a mannequin, not on a patient. So generally the structure which is being shown here is a Macintosh. So this is a Macintosh type of laryngoscope, generally used by anesthetist, not by ENT people, but generally used by an anesthetist to do a laryngeal endotracheal intubation on an emergency basis. But the procedure is same. Okay, whether we do or anesthetist do, the procedure is same. So this is how you fit. This is the, and we have two type of blades actually. So this is a curved blade, and we also have a straight blade. The straight blade is known as Muller's. that is Muller's laryngoscope, and this is the curved one which is known as Mackintosh. This is just for clinical purpose. Nowhere you need to write your in your exams, or nowhere you will be asked. Just for your information, I am giving. This is the curved blade known as Mackintosh. Mackintosh is the curved blade. Straight blade is Muller's. Okay. So this is a mannequin type. Okay, so specimen type. You can see this is the upper. These are the upper teeth. This actually it's an upper. No, this is the tongue. Okay, so this is the tongue. So see, this is how you should be able to see the laryngoscope. Okay, so these are the arytenoids. These are the periepiglottic folds. This is an epiglottis. This is an epiglottis. Okay, these are the true chords. This is the false chord. This is the anterior commissure, and whereas this is the posterior commissure. Okay, so you need to visualize the laryngoscope structures like this. Sorry. So this is what the blade which I was talking. This is the straight blade, which is the Muller's blade. So this is the straight blade. Okay, so this is the Muller's blade which I was talking, and that was the curved blade. Okay. See, this is the epiglottis. So this procedure is generally done direct most of the cases most of the emergency cases we do a direct laryngoscopy using a Mackintosh. So we will prepare a endotracheal tube and keep it in that video. The only thing which I wanted to show you is this one. Okay, so this one. That's how we introduce and we try to visualize the whole larynx. Okay, I think here you have seen clearly. This is the true chord, false chords, very epiglottic. This is the piriform confusion. So that is how the direct laryngoscopy is done. If you have any doubts, then okay.